Welcome back, everyone. Today we're jumping straight into a massive explainer, a true ऐतिहासिक विश्लेषण, or historical analysis, of a place whose identity is honestly so much larger, older, and frankly more complex than what's usually printed in the textbooks. We're going to decode the vast 65,000-year history of Maharashtra. Okay, let's dive right into this. When you hear the word Maharashtra, I bet the very first image that pops into your head is the legendary Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, right? And it makes sense. His legacy is literally woven into the very fabric of this land. So much so that it kind of feels like Maharashtra's story starts with him. But does it? The reality is, the true story of this land and its people kicked off millennia before the Marathas or the Mughals even entered the picture. Let's completely shatter that conventional timeline for a second. If we rewind a staggering 65,000 years, you'd see early human hunter-gatherers making the dense, rugged forests of the Western Ghats their home. Fast forward a bit to around 2000 BCE, and we actually see the Indus Valley civilization leaving its fingerprints right here at Daimabad. Archaeologists dug up these magnificent copper chariots there. So this place was already plugged into a huge global network way back then. But its first true political identity, that really sparked around 200 BCE. Which brings us to Section 1, the Deccan's global trade era and the rise of the Satavahana Empire. After the Mauryan Empire up north started to fade, the Deccan Plateau saw its very first centralized superpower step up to the plate. Founded by King Simukha and brought to its absolute peak by rulers like Gautamiputra Satakarni, the Satavahanas were just brilliant at using their geography. They transformed their capital, Paisan, known back then as Pratishtan, into this massive economic powerhouse. But you know what their real secret weapon was? It wasn't just a strong army. It was their ports. Coastal cities like Kalyan and Sopara became buzzing international trade hubs. And I mean, they were making serious money. Roman ships were constantly riding the monsoon winds straight into these ports. In fact, this trade was so incredibly lucrative for the Deccan that the Roman historian Pliny the Elder was literally crying about it in his writings. No, seriously, he was lamenting how Rome's wealth was just draining away into India, just to buy Deccan muslins and spices. Roman gold coins were basically everyday pocket change in Deccan markets. Let's move to Section 2 and see how this builds. Carving mountains, shaping language. The Vakatakas and Rashtrakutas. So, following the Satavahanas, we see this absolute cultural explosion. These next dynasties didn't just rule the land, they fundamentally shaped the landscape itself. Take the Vakataka king Harisena, for example. Under his rule, the world-famous Ajanta caves came to life. I really want you to vividly imagine this. Ancient artists working for centuries, deep inside pitch-black caves right next to plunging river gorges. They were painting these mesmerizing, intricate masterpieces with nothing but the flickering light of simple oil lamps. It's an artistic achievement that honestly still blows our minds today. But then you have the Rashtrakutas, who took things to a completely different level of extreme engineering. Under King Krishna I, engineers carved the Kailasa temple at Ellora. And get this, they didn't build it from the ground up. They literally carved an entire mountain of solid basalt from the top down. To pull that off, they had to strip away over 200,000 tons of solid rock. Even civil engineers today will tell you that achieving that kind of monolithic perfection with just hammers and chisels is practically impossible now. But here's the thing. These empires weren't just carving stone. They were actively shaping a linguistic identity. Over time, Sanskrit and the local Prakrit combined to form Maharashtri Prakrit. By the 9th and 10th centuries, this evolved into the modern Marathi language we know today. And then, in the 13th century, Sant Janeshwar authored the Janeshwari. This was a huge game changer. It brought a massive literary tradition into the mainstream and culturally united the entire Deccan under one shared linguistic thread. Now for Section 3, Invasions and Political Shifts. The Fall of Devagiri. Right, so while the Deccan is enjoying this beautiful cultural golden age under the Yadava dynasty in their supposedly invincible capital of Devagiri, a massive political earthquake is brewing up north. In 1296, Alauddin Khilji, who was actually just a governor at the time, pulled off a shocking lightning-fast strike. He secretly marched 8,000 cavalry troops across the rugged Vindhya Mountains without even breathing a word to the Delhi Sultan. But his real weapon was psychological warfare. He spread this terrifying rumor that 20,000 more Delhi troops were marching right behind him. That sheer psychological pressure, mixed with severed supply lines, caused King Ramachandra's invincible Devagiri fort to completely collapse. This blitzkrieg literally kicked the Deccan's doors wide open to northern powers forever. What's really interesting about this slide is the profound domino effect that followed. The resulting Bahmani Empire eventually fractured into 5 warring sultanates. And because these 5 states were constantly at each other's throats, fighting over land, they desperately needed soldiers. So what did they do? They started heavily recruiting local Maratha chieftains. Completely by accident, these sultanates gave the Marathas years of deep, first-hand experience in military strategy, weaponry, and the ruthless, cutthroat politics of power. Which perfectly sets up Section 4, the Maratha resurgence and a new political consciousness. Fast forward to the mid-17th century. Decades of brutal famines, crushing taxes, and those endless sultanate wars acted like a pressure cooker. Deep in the Sahyadri Hills, a brand new political consciousness, a fierce demand for Swarajya ignited, led of course by the legendary Shivaji Bose. But he didn't use massive, traditional standing armies to fight back. He used pure strategic genius. Enter Ganimi Kawa, guerrilla warfare. He essentially turned the rugged geography of the Sahyadris into his ultimate weapon. These huge northern armies, who were totally used to fighting on flat plains, were sitting ducks in narrow mountain passes. The Marathas would instantly cut their supply lines, launch devastating surprise attacks, and then just vanish back into the mountains like ghosts. And it's crucial to understand his vision went way beyond just capturing hill forts. In 1659, when he defeated the Bijapur general, Afzal Khan at Pratapgarh, it wasn't just a military victory. It shattered a centuries-old psychological fear that had gripped the Deccan people. On top of that, while northern empires were entirely obsessed with land, Shivaji Maharaj looked at the sea. He actually built India's first modern indigenous navy. Under brilliant commanders like Kanhoji Angre, this navy fiercely challenged heavily armed British, Portuguese, and Dutch ships, totally securing the Konkan coast. Then, tragedy strikes. After Shivaji Maharaj's passing, the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb marched south with an absolutely colossal army, totally expecting the empire to just fold. He brutally captured and executed Shivaji's son, Sambhaji Maharaj. But man, this was Aurangzeb's ultimate fatal mistake, because instead of crushing the rebellion, he managed to turn the entire society into rebels. Under incredible leaders like Rajaraman Tarabai, literally every farmer and soldier united for an astonishing 27-year war of defiance. It was a brutal war of attrition that bled the Mughal treasury entirely dry and ultimately left Aurangzeb buried in the Deccan, breaking the Mughal Empire's spine for good. Moving into Section 5, Expansion, Debate, and Decline, the peak of the Maratha Empire. With the Mughals severely weakened, the Maratha Empire entered its Peshwa era and just exploded out of the Sahyadris. Their cavalry swept across the subcontinent, famously stretching from Attock to Cuttack. Now, the crucial point here is how we view this massive expansion, because academics fiercely debated. On one hand, you have nationalist historians like Rajwade and Sardesai who view this as a grand movement for Hindavi Swarajya, a righteous fight against religious oppression. But on the other hand, historians like Jadunath Sarkar and Stuart Gordon look at it from a purely economic perspective. They argue the Marathas were driven by a desperate practical need to collect Chauth and Sardashmukhi taxes just to keep their vast military machine running. It's an absolutely fascinating debate about the real motives behind building an empire. However, this rapid, explosive expansion hit a truly tragic wall on January 14, 1761, at the Third Battle of Panipat against the Afghan army of Ahmad Shah Abdali. Just put yourself in their shoes for a second. Deccan soldiers, completely unused to the bitter, freezing cold of a North Indian winter, fighting without proper warm clothes. Their supply lines were totally severed. Plus, crucial diplomatic failures meant they had zero support from local Rajput and Jat rulers. It was a perfect storm that led to a devastating, crushing defeat. And this wasn't just a bad day on the battlefield, it was a profound generational trauma. When you read the historical documents from that time, it's just heartbreaking. The casualty rate was so catastrophic that it was said literally every single family back in the Deccan lost a member on that frozen ground. It was an absolutely staggering blow to the people of Maharashtra. Naturally, trauma on that scale had lasting consequences. The Panipat disaster abruptly halted their expansion and blew open a massive power vacuum. By the late 18th century, this once unified powerhouse had fractured into competing factions, the Scindias, Holkars, Gaikwads, and Bhonsles. And unfortunately, that division was exactly what a new foreign power was waiting for.
Using highly modern military tactics and a really ruthless divide and rule strategy, the British East India Company picked apart these weakened factions one by one, ultimately taking total control by 1818.
So all of this brings us to a really profound question. When we look at the soaring skylines, the massive economic engine, and the fierce, undeniable pride of modern Maharashtra today, what actually built this land? Was it just the legacy of a few famous kings? Was it the rugged, unforgiving geography of the Sayadri Mountains? Or is it the unbreakable resilience of a 65,000-year journey? From anonymous artists carving masterpieces in the dark, to savvy merchants draining Rome's gold, to everyday farmers bleeding in the snows of Panipat. It's a place that has quite literally always written history on its own terms. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today, and I'll catch you next time.